What if the Galactic Republic didn't fall because it was conquered, but because it slowly convinced itself that democracy was too inconvenient to keep? That uncomfortable question sits at the heart of the Republic's final years. There was no dramatic invasion of the Senate chamber, no sudden purge of lawmakers. Instead, the collapse arrived dressed in legality, procedure, and reassurance. Democracy didn't end in fire, it ended in paperwork. A republic built on ideals and distance. For centuries, the Galactic Republic represented the galaxy's boldest political experiment. Thousands of systems, species, and cultures were united not by conquest but by shared law and debate. The Senate chamber itself symbolized this dream. Floating pods circling a common center, endless speeches echoing through a space meant to embody equality. Yet the very scale that made the Republic impressive also made it fragile. Representation stretched across hyperspace, turning citizens into abstractions and planets into statistics. Senators often governed worlds they had never visited, speaking for populations they barely understood. As distance grew, accountability weakened. Decisions slowed under layers of bureaucracy. Responsibility dissolved into committees and subcommittees. Democracy still existed, but it began to feel remote, sluggish, and incapable of responding to real danger. When debate turned into delay, the Senate believed discussion was its greatest strength, and for a long time it was. Debate prevented tyranny, encouraged compromise, and forced competing interests to coexist. Over time, however, debate hardened into delay. Speeches repeated themselves. Votes stalled. Urgent matters were endlessly postponed, not because solutions were impossible, but because delay protected political comfort. Nothing illegal was happening, that was the danger. The Senate followed its own rules so rigidly that it forgot why those rules existed. As crises multiplied, the chamber's inability to act decisively sent a quiet but powerful message across the galaxy. Democracy couldn't keep up anymore. When people stop believing a system can protect them, they don't abandon order, they search for someone faster. The rise of the reasonable strongman, that someone was Palpatine. He never arrived waving threats or declaring ambition. He arrived sounding reasonable. Calm, patient, measured. While the Senate argued, Palpatine offered certainty. While lawmakers hesitated, he offered direction. Most importantly, he offered reassurance that nothing permanent would change. He didn't claim democracy had failed. He suggested it was temporarily overwhelmed. He didn't ask for loyalty, he asked for trust. In a system exhausted by gridlock, that distinction mattered. Palpatine didn't seize power by breaking the rules. He mastered them. Emergency powers and the illusion of control. The moment that sealed the Republic's fate arrived not with a battle, but with a vote. Faced with war and internal division, the Senate granted Palpatine emergency powers, expanding his authority beyond constitutional limits. The logic was simple and persuasive. The Republic needed speed, unity, and centralized command. Emergency powers didn't abolish democracy, they bypassed it. The Senate convinced itself the arrangement was temporary, a necessary pause until stability returned. But power once centralized rarely flows back on its own. Crises have a way of extending themselves, especially when someone benefits from their continuation. What began as an exception quietly became the new baseline. War as a permanent excuse. The Clone Wars permanently altered the Republic's relationship with power. Governance shifted from representation to survival. Oversight weakened in the name of security. Secrecy expanded under the banner of necessity. Decisions that once required consensus were now made by a shrinking circle of authority. The Senate still convened. Debates still happened. But increasingly, those debates no longer shaped outcomes. War didn't silence democracy outright. It drowned it in urgency. Questioning leadership was framed as undermining unity. Caution was recast as weakness. Slowly, the Senate accepted the idea that efficiency mattered more than principle. The Jedi's absence and the Senate's exposure. The Jedi Order were never meant to rule the Republic, but their very existence acted as a stabilizing force within it. As impartial peacekeepers, they stood outside political factions, personal ambition, and electoral pressure. Their authority came not from votes or titles, but from moral credibility and long-standing tradition. As long as the Jedi operated independently, they served as a quiet reminder that power within the Republic had limits that even senators and chancellors were expected to respect. That balance shattered during the Clone Wars. When the Jedi were pushed into the role of generals, they became entangled in strategy, command structures, and wartime decision-making. Their neutrality eroded, and their ability to act as an independent moral check collapsed. With the Jedi distracted by battle and later erased entirely, the Senate lost one of the last institutions capable of resisting centralized authority. Palpatine did not eliminate the Jedi because they led armies. He eliminated them because they represented boundaries his power could not cross. Applause in the face of surrender. One of the most haunting sounds in the Republic's final years was not an explosion or a scream. It was applause. When Palpatine announced expanded authority to ensure security and stability, the Senate responded with approval that echoed through the chamber. That reaction wasn't born from cruelty or malice. It came from exhaustion, from fear, from relief. Relief is one of the most dangerous political emotions. It blurs the line between safety and surrender. In that moment, senators weren't cheering for tyranny. They were cheering for certainty. The uncertainty of war, gridlock, and endless debate had become unbearable. Palpatine offered clarity, and clarity felt like salvation. The tragedy is that applause once given is hard to take back, especially when it marks the moment control quietly slips away. When truth became political, as power consolidated, truth itself began to fracture. The Senate chamber transformed from a place of deliberation into a battlefield of competing narratives. Facts no longer stood on their own. They were filtered through loyalty, faction, and political survival. Every warning about authoritarian drift was dismissed as exaggeration. Every accusation became framed as partisan theater. Once objective reality collapsed, accountability followed it into obscurity. Corruption no longer needed secrecy because confusion provided better cover. When no one agrees on what is real, no one can be held responsible for what is done. Debate continued, but it no longer clarified anything. It generated noise, shielding authority behind endless argument. The Empire's most effective disguise. When the Galactic Republic finally transformed into the Galactic Empire, the Senate did not disappear overnight. Instead, it lingered as a hollow institution, stripped of real authority but preserved as a symbol of continuity. Its existence reassured star systems that representation still mattered, that the transformation was procedural rather than ideological. This was the Empire's most effective disguise. As long as the Senate existed, dissent felt unnecessary. Only when legitimacy was no longer required did the truth surface. The Senate was dissolved with a simple announcement: no debate, no vote. Democracy didn't end in chaos. It was dismissed as obsolete, like outdated legislation no longer worth referencing. Was the Senate corrupt or merely human? The tragedy of the Senate is not that it was filled with villains plotting the Republic's destruction. It was filled with ordinary politicians responding to incentives. Delay felt safer than confrontation. Compromise felt wiser than resistance. Each small concession appeared reasonable when viewed in isolation, but systems are not destroyed by single decisions. They are dismantled by patterns. When survival becomes the priority, principles become negotiable. When every compromise feels temporary, permanence arrives unnoticed. Together, these choices, made by well-intentioned individuals, unraveled a civilization. The quiet end of democracy. The Senate chamber still stood at the end. The architecture remained. The history was intact, but the meaning was gone. Democracy had been hollowed out long before it was officially erased. That is the Republic's final lesson. Freedom rarely disappears in a single moment. More often, it fades politely, applauded as it leaves the room. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how the Republic really fell, and how power, fear, and silence reshaped the galaxy, there's a lot more coming. We break down Star Wars lore beyond the lightsabers, digging into the ideas that changed everything. For more videos like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel.